So, hello, Serhiy. So, you just had a presentation on the war in Donbass. What are the main arguments of your paper, please?
Well, I try to disaggregate the conflict and show that there is a substantial variation in the extent to which the insurgents were capable of controlling parts of Donbass and the extent to which locals were either compliant with the insurgents or even actively opposed to them and were pushing them out of these territories even before the Ukrainian armed forces moved in. So this evidence, for me, raises a big question about the local sources of the insurgency, the extent to which that insurgency has not been predetermined from the outside, but really had its roots on the local level. And so I'm looking at two factors, two variables that explain the insurgency to me. One is the extent to which the state in Ukraine disintegrated as the revolution progressed, the extent to which territories got out of control of Kiev and how that was perceived in other parts of Ukraine, particularly in the Donbass. And the second element is the legitimization of the use of violence and the use of force for political purposes, and the extent to which that became a norm as Euromaidan revolution progressed, and how that was used by the locals, by the insurgents on the ground, both to mobilize people against the threat perceived against the nationalists, but also using their own tactics to capture government buildings and simulating what was happening in Euromaidan. So my general argument is that Russia definitely played an important role by amplifying the fears, by facilitating the movement, but without understanding the domestic sources of the insurgency, we would not be able to explain this variation in the level of violence in different parts of Donbass.
In listening to your presentation, you mentioned that a part of the population was neutral.
Yes.
I was thinking about the local elites. Did the local elites neutral also in this process?
So initially, local elites, particularly in Donetsk and Luhansk, tried to play with the secessionist movement, but they quickly understood that the secessionist movement is as much a threat to them as it is to Kiev. And so by mid-March, you see that the mayor of Donetsk, for example, the mayor of Luhansk, they try to distance themselves from the movement. The local deputies of these councils, oblast councils, they try to distance themselves as well. And the big oligarchs, like Akhmetov, for example, their television channels become extremely critical of the insurgents, and they are also staunchly pro-Ukrainian. So in that sense, I would say local elites, particularly the main elites in Donetsk and Luhansk, gradually became anti-secession. They openly resisted the secession. But then the elites in smaller towns, they were more ambivalent, and I think depending on the power balance, they were either playing with the movement or resisting it. But it was not universal across Donbass.
You are analyzing what is going on in Ukraine. Can you give us your opinion as a citizen?
Well, as a citizen, it was heartbreaking. Since December, basically, or since November, I was extremely distracted and just personally emotional about all the things that were happening in Ukraine. And of course, you're even more emotional because you're outside. I teach at Baylor University. I live in Texas. So sensing or feeling that you cannot do much about what's happening on the ground, I think that added to my personal unhappiness about what's happening. I felt that a little powerless to change anything. So that's why I write papers instead, just to feel a little bit part of the process.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.